Start right at noon, so I'll wait for everybody to who's able to log on by noon, and then we'll get started. Hi, Crystal, Sherry, Jackie, Kelly, Nora, Monica, Patricia. Thank you. Thanks for joining. Thank you, Sherry. Love and light to you too. Hi, Angela. Hi, Pamela, Kimberly, and Deb. Deb Lee B. I like that name, Deb. Wow. Sophia, hello from Denmark. Thanks for joining us. Hi, Jackie. The topic is going to be what we learn from pain, how we can turn painful experiences into meaning. It's based on my book, More Beautiful Than Before: How Suffering Transforms Us. So hope you stick with us. Hi, Kelly and Karen and Maddie. Bridget, welcome. Hope you stay with us, Sophia. I'm going to start right at noon, and we'll jump into our topic. Really wonderful. So many people are joining us. Wow, all the way from Scotland. Welcome, Miroslav. Catherine, I'm really sorry to hear this about the death of your daughter. And please, as this conversation unfolds, please send me a question or a comment, and I'll do what I can to help. Sherry, I'm glad the topic's good, perfectly timed for you. Must mean you're going through something very difficult, and I'm here to help you today. Ontario, Canada. Hi, Tara. I'm from Minnesota. Spent many great summers fishing in Ontario. Croatia. Hi, Tamara. Welcome. I agree, Janet. It's amazing, all these people coming together from all over the world to talk about something so important. Jennifer, the topic is how and why and how pain can be a great teacher. It's based on my book, More Beautiful Than Before: How Suffering Transforms Us. So that's what we're going to be talking about today in about 3 minutes. Hi, Jane from North Carolina. Beautiful place. Wow, Sue, all the way from Australia. Thank you for joining us, Sue. Melissa, I'm sorry for what you've been through. We're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about grief and how to manage it. So I promise that we'll get to that. We have Denmark. Hi, Diana. Hi, Terry from Idaho. In 2 weeks, I'm going to be fishing the South Fork of the Snake River, fly fishing there in Idaho. So beautiful there. Athelia, I'm sorry to hear that about your brother, and I promise we're gonna spend time dealing with the topic of grief today. Wow, Krishy just saw me on Steve Harvey. I know that episode. I taped a segment for the Steve Harvey show, and it's airing today. And Steve was really gracious. He's a wonderful interviewer. So I hope everybody here will get a chance to watch it today, or go to Steve Harvey's website and see it, or go to my website, steveleader.com, and see it. Wow. Elisabetta from Venice, welcome. Huh, Linda, we'll we'll talk about your adult son. If you send me something very, something specific you want to ask, I'll be glad to address it. Yes, I agree, Terry. Idaho is very healing, no doubt about it. Mm, okay. Jenny, I think what we're going to do is talk about the PTSD of pain for sure. Uh, the fact that you're better physically, but still feeling the emotional brunt of that pain. Um, we're going to talk about that. I will tell you why I wrote this book and that I suffered from the very same phenomenon. So we can share a little bit with each other about how to get through these painful things. Well, it's noon, so let's begin. And I think I'll begin by sharing with everybody, and there's so many of you from all over the world um, on with us now. Why did I write this book? How did I come to write it? How is it structured, and how might it help everyone who's participating today? I have been a rabbi of a very large congregation in Los Angeles for 30 years now. And we're talking about a congregation of 2,400 families, close to 10,000 people. And for the first 27 of those 30 years, I helped an awful lot of people through tremendously difficult and painful experiences. I've helped parents, bury a child in a coffin the size of a shoebox. I've helped people through cancer, through suicides of people they deeply loved, through divorce, through ruined reputations, and um, children in trouble, physical pain, addiction, emotional pain, depression. There are 20 million Americans who suffer from clinical depression, and even more who suffer from anxiety. Um, America represents 5% of the world's population, but we take 85% of the world's painkillers and opioids. So for 27 years, I was a rabbi of this very large congregation and helping people through very painful experiences. And then 3 years ago, I was in a very frightening car accident, which caused, to make a long story short, very serious damage to my spine. And I ended up in excruciating pain for months, and then finally had surgery and was in terrible recovery pain as well. And through this entire period, I was taking opioids after opioids after opioids and steroids after steroids after steroids. I became clinically depressed, and I'd never been a depressed person before in my life. And after I eventually came out of this, my approach to helping people in pain, I noticed had changed quite significantly, meaning that for those first 27 years of my rabbinate, despite how much I tried, I realized I actually wasn't being as helpful as I could have been to people who were in pain, because I knew nothing personally about terrible physical and emotional pain. And this book, which is called More Beautiful Than Before, How Suffering Transforms Us, was and is my effort to set the record straight on pain, to help all of us, and that really does mean all of us, because to be human is to suffer, to help everyone who is suffering from pain, to find a way to make that suffering less awful and more meaningful. The book is actually divided into 3 sections. The first, surviving. You essentially have to survive the pain in order to learn or grow from it. So the book is divided into these 3 sections: surviving, healing, and growing. And from my experience, that's the trajectory of pain. Ideally, of course, we survive, we heal, and then we grow and make something of that pain. So that is essentially what we're here to talk about today. I'm looking forward to hearing from some of you about your questions and how I might be able to help you. Let's start with something that Jenny mentions, which is that pain changed me, she says, for the better, but I need to learn to let go of the feeling of it like it's still happening. It's like my body doesn't want to let go of the body pain. You know, Jenny, after my spinal surgery, my physical therapist explained something very, very interesting to me, which was new to me, which is that even after the physical injury is repaired, our minds are still suffering and expecting our body to hurt again. And therefore, our mind tries to protect us from exposing ourselves to that pain again. It keeps us from moving fluidly, for example, after a surgery or an accident. It makes us sort of gun shy, to put it in another way, that we're frightened of our own bodies. And she was very, very helpful to me in getting through that by, first of all, just explaining the actual phenomenon, that actually the injury was no longer there and that this was a psychological protective measure in place. Even just knowing that helped me start to move beyond it. And so I offer that first to you, that knowing that you have PTSD is the first step toward solving it. The second thing I would tell you is I suspect that there's not just a physical component, but a psychological component that you've yet to really face successfully in terms of this suffering. Why did I have to suffer? It's how do I deal with the feeling of vulnerability, of having suffered, the fear of maybe suffering again. And I really urge you to reach out for some help. There's an essay in the book that is called "The Prisoner Cannot Free Himself." The prisoner cannot free himself. None of us, no matter who we are, suffers pain better alone. We have to reach out. We have to reach out to talented professionals, physical therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists. We need to reach out to our friends and to our family, because they will help you. They will reach back and help to lift you from your suffering. So I hope, Jenny, that you're reaching out to others, because that's such an important part of healing. It's one of the most humbling and important lessons of pain. So that I think is my best advice to you. I want to go to something that Kathy has mentioned, which is that going through painful situations opens a gateway of sorts to the esoteric, the spiritual truths. Our consciousness opens as we become more vulnerable. That is how the light can start seeping into our consciousness. Been there, done that. Kathy, I just want to tell you how right I think you are. Emerson said there is a crack in everything. And then Leonard Cohen, the great poet, said, that's how the light gets in. There's a crack in everything, and that's how the light gets in. One of the points that I make in the book, and I think this is actually a deeply spiritual point, I think what it really means to be a spiritual person is to be able to hold two seemingly contradictory truths together in one heart and one soul. And the seemingly contradictory truth that more beautiful than before opens up for us is the following, that in a way, we are actually more whole when we're broken. There's a kind of wholeness that can only be achieved through brokenness. For those of you who may be religious, I'll put it in biblical terms for you. There's a verse in the book of Deuteronomy that says God puts God's words upon our hearts. And the sages ask a question about this verse. Why does it say God puts God's words upon our hearts and not into our hearts? Certainly, God has the power to put words into our hearts if God has the power to put words upon our hearts. And the answer the sages give is very deep and powerful. And that's the following. They say that God puts words upon our hearts, and it isn't until our hearts are broken that the words can enter. I think it's so beautiful that there's something about brokenness and the vulnerability and humility that comes from that brokenness that can actually make us kinder, gentler, more beautiful human beings. So Kathy, I'm here to tell you that this book in essence, and my work in essence, is the affirmation of your point, that there is something about this brokenness that allows something even more beautiful to find its way into us. So I couldn't agree with you more. I'm scrolling down now and just looking at some other questions. Denise has asked, could you speak to the comfort of the darkness? I tend to always see the light and not give energy to the darkness. Oh, Denise, it's so important what you're saying. And this is an opportunity for us to talk about grief, darkness and grief. I often tell people who come in to see me who are grieving over the loss of a loved one, the death of a loved one. Sometimes it's the loss of a relationship, not death. Sometimes it's the loss of a reputation, the loss of a breast after a mastectomy. People who are struggling with grief over loss often come in to ask me, when will this be over? When will this clear up, as if grief is some kind of condition that clears up? And it doesn't. And what I tell people really is the following. Anyone who thinks the shortest distance between 2 points when it comes to grief is a straight line knows nothing about grief. Because grief is not a linear process. It's not something that's terrible at first and every day gets a little bit better until it's gone. Grief is much more, in my experience, like waves. It comes and it goes, it comes and it goes, it ebbs and it flows, it ebbs and it flows. And much like waves, when you see an enormous wave coming at you, you really have two choices. You can try to stand up in it with all your might, in which case usually that wave will just crash down upon you and throw you over and turn you upside down and leave you confused and gasping and frightened. Or you can lie down and let that wave wash over you and let it take you and float with it. Just float with it for a while, and then when you're able to, stand up again. And I think this is very good advice when it comes to grief, when it comes to, Denise, what you call the darkness. When that darkness descends upon you, float with it, be with it. You really can't rush your way through it. Another religious reference is this idea that when the ancient Israelites traveled in the desert and wandered for 40 years, there was a cloud that covered the camp sometimes. And the Bible says that when the cloud was over the camp, nobody moved. They just stayed put. They just waited it out. And this is so true of grief and darkness. Darkness is a reminder to slow down and take your time. As long as we're on this metaphor of darkness, I would like to share an idea with you about shadows as well. When we often talk about walking through the valley of the shadows of death. If you think about it, a shadow is actually only possible if the sun is still shining. A shadow is created by something obstructing the sunlight. A shadow is actually proof positive that the sun is still shining, but it's temporarily obstructed. So I urge all of us who are dwelling in the darkness and in the shadows of pain to have faith and hope that if we settle in and take our time, and as I said before earlier in the talk, reach out for help to others, we will make our way through. And I hope that's helpful to everyone. I'm going to look down now at some other comments. Carrie, I'm sorry to hear this news, Carrie. Carrie writes, my husband has been suffering from pancreatic cancer for 3 years. I'm trying to figure out if God's trying to teach me something or my husband. The truth is, I don't think so, Carrie. I don't think God chooses who gets cancer and who doesn't. That doesn't mean there isn't something to learn from this experience, but I don't think that God is involved in singling out any one individual over another for suffering. To be human is to suffer, but I don't think that we suffer selectively due to the will of God. I want to be clear about my work and about this book, More Beautiful Than Before. In no way do I intend it to be a glorification or an idealization of suffering or of pain. Pain is horrible, awful. Suffering is awful. And I don't think we should try to frame it any other way. And none of what we learn from this horrible pain is worth it, is worth the pain. The lessons carry the ways in which your life has changed and will change because of your pancreatic cancer, or of your husband's pancreatic cancer, are not worth it. My point is, however, neither are they worth less. There is something meaningful to be found in this experience. And our role is to search and to find. It may be a deeper sense of love and appreciation for him, for your love for each other, for your family, for remarkably talented physicians. It may be a stripping away of the unimportant, some of the other things that you felt or thought were important. And going forward, I would offer all of us this who have gone through terrible suffering. Dostoevsky said his greatest fear was that his life would not be worthy of his suffering. That is such a powerful idea. Can we lead a life worthy of our suffering? Can we change our lives in ways that make us more humane human beings because of what we've been through? That's the goal. That's real growth. And I wish that for you, Carrie. But in no way can we justify this as somehow, or can I justify this as somehow God's will. I had a friend who had 3 different forms of cancer, an amazing guy named Paul Miller, 3 different cancers, and the third cancer was fatal. I remember visiting Paul in the hospital when he was dying of that third cancer, and he looked up at me from his hospital bed and he said, Steve, this much character I don't need. So let's not pretend that this is a wonderful thing, but let's also affirm the fact that if you have to go through hell, don't come out empty-handed. Come out of this with something powerful and meaningful in your life. And I hope that's helpful to you. And I really honestly hope you'll take a look at the book, because I think it will help you. And it deals with this, what we call theodicy, this problem of issue of God and the problem of evil. Emma. Oh, Emma, thank you for being here. Emma is just quoting this idea of Leonard Cohen's, that sort of paraphrasing Emerson, there's a crack in everything and that's how the light gets in. It's true, but as I was saying to Carrie, let's not underestimate the pain of what breaks us open. That Catherine, I'm reading your quote now. The wave hits me pretty much every day. Some are like a tsunami, others I can step through with gentleness and mild tears, but it's still every day, and the waves always paralyze me. Nothing has cleared any of the mist from my life. Catherine, I'm sorry, really am, and you're on a very long road, to be honest. Grief is a very long road. What we hope for is that the frequency of the waves begins to change, and they become less frequent. But there will always be days when we are overcome with terrible, terrible grief. I hope that you are finding some ways to structure or contain that grief, something. I'm not sure if you're a religious person or not, and if you are, which religion, but most people do find some kind of daily ritual helpful, creating some kind of vessel for that pain that you're suffering every day. If it's having a certain time every day to light a candle, or to say a little prayer, or simply to stop and meditate for a moment on a beautiful memory you have of your loved one, something that will help create, as I said, this vessel for these feelings, because that will also hopefully help free up some of the rest of the day and the night, for you to be at least less burdened by the sadness. And this is something I actually said on the Steve Harvey show today. The most honest and helpful thing I can say to you, truthful thing I can say to you about grief, is that it won't always hurt so much. It will always hurt, but it will not always hurt this much. It does get better, and you will warm to life again, and I promise you that. Okay, I'm scrolling down now. Mm. Tina says, my daughter passed away 10 years ago, and it's always been hard, but it ended up helping me in a different way. I've seen her, I've become empathic. I've been able to help other people understand what they're going through. You know, it's such a good point, Tina. And it leads to a whole nother topic that I think we should discuss that's also in the book, which is what do we do, not when we're the one reaching out, when we're in pain and we reach out, we know we need to reach out. The prisoner cannot free himself, as I said earlier. But what about when we're the ones being reached out to? What do we do when we witness the pain of another? And that's a whole nother set of essays in the book. But let me talk about the simplest and most important idea. And that is what not to do. If you are witness to another's pain, never say these 7 words. Never say this. Let me know if you need anything. First of all, in most cases, that is false empathy. It's like kabuki empathy. Most people who say that don't really mean it, and they hope the person never asks. But even if you're sincere in that offer, let me know if you need anything. You're nevertheless placing the burden back on the shoulders of the person who is already suffering, already exhausted, um, already depressed and worn out. And you're placing the burden back on his or her shoulders to ask for what he or she needs. Never say, let me know if you need anything. Instead, just anticipate the other person's needs. Show up. Think about if you were in the same situation, what would help you, whether that's carpooling for the kids, play dates for the kids, a nice, beautiful hot meal dropped off at the front door a couple times a week, going with someone to the doctor's appointment to take notes, because when you're the patient, the shock of it all creates a kind of fog of memory. Figure out something you can do to be helpful and do it. Don't wait to be asked. That's an extremely, extremely important concept. And yes, Tina, you're right. Part of the healing process is being able to help others who are behind you on this journey of suffering. To be honest, I wrote this book at one level as a way of making peace with my own pain and doing something meaningful with what I had been through by creating something that would help other people. And that has helped me. So I'm very glad to hear, Tina, that you found your way through by reaching out to others. I'm just scrolling through more comments. Cynthia, I'm glad Cynthia mentions that she found that idea of being broken, allowing God's words to enter, very profound. I will say to you, Cynthia, I pray differently than I did before my accident and my surgery and having to get off of the opioids to which I was addicted. Um, I pray differently. I have a different sense of spirituality. The prayer comes to me much more than I chase after the prayer. Uh, and look, I don't think I was a bad guy before all of this happened to me, but I think I'm a better person because of it. You know, I only write about 5% of the book is about my own experience. So much of it is about the experiences that I've been through with others. But there's no question about it that um, for many of us, for most of us, maybe all of us, pain is the great teacher. You know, success doesn't really teach us very much. Success just encourages us to keep doing the same things over and over and over again. It's really only pain that's disruptive enough to force us to change. One of my favorite quotes is by Marshall McLuhan, the Canadian philosopher, who said, I don't know who discovered water, but it wasn't the fish. And what McLuhan means by that is we're so immersed in our own reality, we actually have no perspective on it. You know, when does a fish discover water? When it's yanked out of the water, flailing on the end of a hook and gasping for air. That's when a fish discovers water. When do we discover good health? When we lose our health. When do we discover the true depth of our love for another human being? When that human being is gone. So there is something so disruptive about pain. It sounds odd to put it this way. So painful about pain. But that disruption is the only thing that really changes our lives. The sages of the Talmud said, if you are visited by pain, examine your life. Now, they didn't mean that you should examine your life because you've done something to deserve the pain. What they meant was that pain is an invitation to change our lives. And that's, I think, what Dostoevsky was talking about when he said his greatest fear was that his life would not be worthy of his suffering, that his suffering would be for naught instead of a vehicle and an impetus to change his life somehow for the better. And I just could not agree with you more. Wendy's asking a very interesting question. Wendy asks, how can I find it easier to listen to others' grief without triggering my own waves of grief? Wendy, I'm not sure, to be honest with you, that you can, because I don't know enough to know where you are in the trajectory of the surviving, healing, or growing process. If your grief is a relatively fresh wound, you may not want to or be able to spend a good deal of time helping others through their grief or listening to too much of it yourself, because you need more time to sit with your own pain and suffering, to float with that wave of grief as we described it. So I'm not sure you're ready yet. If you are ready and you think this is far enough behind me that I really can listen and help others, but it triggers in a kind of PTSD way, then I think you have to limit it, because you really have to protect your own heart first. It's hard to be empathetic to another if that empathy is constantly throwing you back into that severe pain that you've suffered. So you may have jumped in a little too early into helping others. You may still be a very wounded healer. I'm not sure, but I offer that to you. I know you're saying now 3 years ago your husband died. 3 years is relatively early in the journey, and I think that you should approach with caution the idea of overly immersing yourself in the suffering of another. I know there are days or there are weeks when I have 3, 4, 5 funerals in a week, and I really just have to stop and shut it down and watch out for myself when I can during weeks like that, without constantly being on output. Your life, Wendy, cannot be a one-way street of always giving, and not taking care of yourself and your own grief. So I hope you think a little bit about pacing yourself and how much listening you're able to do for others. Let me see. Richard sent in a comment. My granddaughter at 2 months had open heart surgery. When one can do nothing, then one learns that the only thing one can do is weep and pray. And it's the way through faith to truly know the personal divine. You know, I often talk about my understanding of prayer, which is very different than I think a common understanding of many people. The word for prayer actually comes from a Latin word, precari, which means to beg. And that is not, in my view, at all what prayer is about. Prayer is not begging God for something. God, in my view, is not some kind of cosmic grantor of wishes. The Hebrew word for prayer, tefillah, comes from the verb to reflect upon oneself. Lahitpalel is the verb. To reflect upon oneself, to look inward. And so, Richard, if I agree with you that during these terribly frightening times, rather than asking for a wish to be granted or begging some cosmic policeman to make things right, we pray in a sense to change ourselves, not so much to change the mind of some God in the sky. We pray as a way of being at peace with that which we cannot change, We pray out of gratitude for life itself. We pray to calm the mind and the heart. We pray holding hands with others to gain strength from the people we love and even strangers. My father has Alzheimer's disease and he's deep into it. Those of you who have this terrible affliction in your family, take a look at Time Magazine's new special edition called The Science of Alzheimer's. I have an essay in there called Lessons from My Father, and that essay is about what this journey with my father and his Alzheimer's has taught me and how it's affected me, and in some ways very positively, despite how painful it is. But I mention, my dad because I pray for him every day, but I'm not praying for him to be healed or to be cured because there is no cure and he's not going to get better. He's only going to slowly get worse until he dies. And I know that. So when I pray for my father, I'm not praying for him to be cured. I know that's really not prayer. That's begging. That's wishful. It's not prayerful. When I pray for my father, I'm praying for peace in his heart and his mind, the mystery that his mind now is. I pray for our family to heal and to embrace each other in this new reality. I pray for the caregivers who treat him with such dignity and kindness. So this is my concept of prayer. It's a much more inward expression of gratitude and sensitivity, and not prayer in the Latin sense of begging. So I hope, Richard, that's helpful to you and helpful to all of us who sometimes struggle with the role that prayer may play. Oh, beautiful, Maureen. I hope you can see that lesson that word to you from that. I hope Wendy can see, Maureen, what you've written. Married 49 years next month. My best friend. Sending gentle hugs to you, Wendy. Can't imagine your pain. Beautiful. Yes, Wendy. Yeah, I'm glad you like this comment that pray is not begging. I mean, it is in the Latin, and it is how some people view prayer. It's certainly not how I look at it. And Wendy, if you want to email me through Hay House or steveleader.com, I will send you a piece that I've just written for another Time magazine edition that's coming out later on mindfulness about prayer and this difference between praying and wishing. I hope it's helpful to you. I'm going to scroll and find some more. Let's go back to Catherine, who says, thank you, not really religious. Vessel, okay, although every time I think of her, I just cry, but thank you after 6 years. Thank you, though, for your words. Catherine, I don't think it means there's anything wrong with you or your grief process if you're still crying every day after 6 years. Cry. It's your way. And tears are beautiful expressions of the depth of our love. So I sense in your comment that you feel there may be something wrong with you because you cry. I think quite the opposite. I worry about the people who don't cry after the death of someone they deeply loved. So cry. It's part of riding, and floating with this terrible grief that you're feeling. I hope that's helpful to you. Stacy is asking if I still have physical pain. I do, but it's more intermittent. It generally comes if I exercise too hard or do something I shouldn't have done. So I need to be careful, and I definitely take better care of myself as a result of that accident. And this is one of the ways in which I've tried to be worthy of the suffering that I've gone through. Monica, I'm glad you found what I said meaningful. Thanks. Monica just said tears just came to her eyes because of what we've been talking about. I'm really glad you're with us and that this is meaningful to you. Sari. Sari is, or sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I feel great loneliness in my bipolar depression. It's hard to reach out. I understand. I think that the most terrible part of painful illness or pain in general is how isolating it is this feeling of abandonment, of feeling that you're in it completely alone. And I hope, Sari, that you will, at a minimum, be able to express to others in your life that it is hard for you to reach out, and you hope that they will reach out to you, and maybe even be very specific about what that means. Does that mean being invited to dinner once in a while? Does that mean let's go to a movie? Does that mean just coming and sitting with you? Um, Telling people it's hard for you to reach out and that you don't mind them reaching to you without being asked. And hopefully people don't need to be asked, I think is a part of it. Because it is hard to reach out. Sometimes it's hard to reach out because of ego. Sometimes it's hard to reach out because you're physically weak. Sometimes people are embarrassed by their affliction, whatever it may be. I'm working right now with someone in my life who's been humiliated publicly because of something that he did, and he's finding it very hard to reach out to his friends for help. And I said, we'll reach out to you. Don't worry about it. I'll organize the troops, and someone's going to call you every day and check in with you and invite you to walk gently and carefully in a protected way, back into life. Okay, I'm just reading Catherine. Thank you. The thing I think is wrong with me is I do very little every day. Used to be an ER and flight nurse and cannot work due to lack of focus and concentration, but it's getting worse and worries me. So Catherine, look, that's more specific and helpful to me. You need help. You have to get help. You're not going to be able to get out of this prison alone. If it was not for an extraordinarily talented psychiatrist, I don't think I would have made it through what I went through. And I continue to see him every week. And by the way, I'm in the helping profession and I'm supposed to know a lot about life and loss. And I do. But when we're talking about our own lives, it's a completely different matter. This is also, I think, what Marshall McLuhan meant when he said, I don't know who discovered water, but it wasn't the fish. We have no perspective on our own lives. A fish is born in water, lives in water, and dies in water. And ironically, therefore, the fish isn't even aware it's in water. You are struggling with something very heavy and very dark and very real. And I'm urging you to reach out for help. And because help will make a tremendous difference. No one suffers pain better alone. So Catherine, I really hope you'll do it. Okay. Okay, so Carol said she'd like a copy of the new article. Send me an email, and I'll send it to you. The one on prayer, I assume you mean. So she's asked me to please review again the Hebrew meaning of prayer. So let's start with the Latin. The word prayer in English comes from the Latin word precari, which means to beg. The Hebrew word for prayer is tefillah, comes from the verb lehit palel, which means to reflect upon oneself, to be introspective. And I hope that's helpful to those of us who have a hard time with the idea of God as cosmic granter or denier of wishes. Because if God answered wishes, all of our lives would be very different. And we all know that terrible things happen to very good people. And worse, good things happen to terrible people. So if God is the cosmic policeman, God's not doing a very good job. So I think this Hebrew concept of prayer is a much more powerful idea. The reason we sometimes have this view of God as puppeteer and human beings as marionettes is because we don't grow beyond a pediatric theology. A 5-year-old brain is only capable of thinking about God in the context of some kind of super parent, excuse me, of a kind of puppeteer. The problem is if you go out into the adult world with the theology and God concept of a 5-year-old, that theology is going to fail you badly when pain comes. And pain comes to us all. The great sage Bob Marley said, when the rain falls, it don't fall on one man's house. We all get rained on. We all suffer. And we all know that we suffer in ways we do not deserve. I mean, this is the book of Job, for goodness sake. So I think this Hebrew concept of prayer as something that's more introspective, something that's more about an internal conversation about how we can be worthy of this suffering and how we can find some sense of gratitude for that which remains, for the people who remain, is very powerful. I'd like to go back to this idea about reaching out and lay something on the table that I think is important. It is true that when you reach out, when you're bipolar and it's not easy to reach out, as Sari said, it is true that some people will disappoint you. But it is also true that some people will be remarkable in the sensitivity and depth of their response. And the way I like to think about this, the way I put it in the book, which is a little bit glib, I admit, but also I think in its own way absolutely perfect. When you reach out from your suffering, the people who matter don't mind. And the people who mind don't matter. Forget about it. You really learn who your friends are and who your friends are not when you go through a painful experience. One of the things that suffering does is it strips away a lot of nonsense from our lives, a lot. And that can be extremely positive going forward. So, Sarah, I'm urging you to reach out. And I hope that you do. And Catherine, I'm urging you to reach out for professional help because I think it'll make a tremendous difference in your life and you'll be grateful for it. Wendy is asking, how do you tell the difference between being sad because of grief versus needing depression medication, as my doctors have suggested I need? I don't believe that the answer is meds. Without knowing a lot more, Wendy, it's hard to answer your question. But if you're seeing a psychiatrist who thinks that some antidepressant might be a bridge to carry you through the most difficult period, I would urge you to seriously consider it. If, on the other hand, you know intuitively that it's not, then I would urge you to invest very, very heavily in terms of time and, yes, money, because it's not inexpensive, in psychotherapy, where you can process this grief and everything that it triggers in your heart and your soul. When you say doctors, I don't know if you're talking about a psychiatrist or just an internist who wants to give you some Zoloft to get you out of his office and keep you from coming back. So I need to know a little bit more to answer your question fully. Kim is saying it's so hard to reach out when they know. It feels like begging to be seen and care about. You know, Kim, I hear this a lot. I hear people in my office sitting on what I call my couch of tears, that they don't want to reach out. They don't want to seem needy. They don't want to burden another person. And all I do, I ask the following. If the situation was reversed, if someone you loved was suffering in the way you are suffering, how would you feel if that person was hesitant to reach out to you because he or she didn't want to bother you or burden you? And almost every time the person says, I'd feel terrible about that. I'd want to be reached out to. I'd want to be told. I would respond. That person should never worry about, reaching out to me for help. I'd want to help. I said, well, the people you would be reaching out to feel exactly the same way. Most people want to help. And again, remember, people who matter don't mind being reached out to, and the people who mind, they don't matter. I'm going to switch for a second just to see if there are people interested in the next part of this conversation, which I deal with in the book. Look, I didn't create a genre by writing this book. There are a lot of books about pain. divorce, grief, addiction, lots of them. Um, but something that I talk about in the book that I think is unusual, pretty rare, is what do we do not when we are experiencing pain or the victim, but what do we do when we are the perpetrator? What do we do when we are the cause of pain to another? What do you do when you are the betrayer, not the betrayed? Because being the betrayer comes with its own universe of pain and shame and guilt and remorse. Then what? So there's an essay in the book called Hurt and Run, and in it I make the observation that very few of us will ever hit and run, but we all hurt and run. We all have left another person's feelings behind like roadkill. And in this piece, I talk about the three most important words that I believe any person can say to begin the process of healing in a fractured relationship. And they are the three most difficult words for most people to say. By the way, those words are not "I am sorry," because "I am sorry" has an awful lot of latitude. You could mean "I'm sorry you feel that I," or "I'm sorry if you think." There's a lot of latitude with "I'm sorry." No. The three most difficult words for most of us to say are, "I was wrong." I was wrong. Being able to say with true sincerity, "I was wrong," changes everything. It begins the road to healing. For those of us in this conversation who have hurt another, and I suspect that means all of us, I hope you'll really focus on that section of my thinking and work and the book as well, because it's so important. And my goodness, doesn't our world and our country need that so badly right now? The ability to say, "I was wrong," and to begin the process of reconciliation. Um, Wendy is saying, "Never needed meds before. I had an excellent counselor for 10 years. He's a widow. He's a widower. He rocks. It was another doctor." Well, then I would ignore the advice of that other doctor. You sound like you're getting really good help. Um, and this is just a long road that you're on. And as I said earlier, the only thing I can say with truth and honesty to you is it won't always hurt this much, but it's going to always hurt. And it will become a part of who you are. And I hope that your life will be meaningful in ways it would not otherwise have been going forward. In terms of not being able to do as much at work, believe me, I understand that. But this is part of what I think the sages meant when they said, if you're visited by pain, examine your life. Maybe you shouldn't be working as much. You should be living a different kind of life as a result of this. I'm going to scroll down now and see if we have some other comments that I haven't been able to talk about yet. Bridget is asking, a dear friend of mine lost her son in a vicious murder 10 years ago and is continuously re-traumatized by the judicial system when those responsible are up for parole. Do you have any words to share with her? Well, this is such a difficult issue because she's in a sense having this wound reopened and reopened and reopened and reopened. And I think there comes a point, and obviously I would do this in a much more delicate and sensitive way if I was talking to her, when we have to really stop expecting anything outside of ourselves to help us heal, other than the people we love. The judicial system ultimately is not going to bring her much satisfaction. In the book, I have this an essay, as I said, called Hurt and Run. And in it, I talk about two families in the congregation, both of whom have had loved ones killed by drivers. Their loved ones were pedestrians. And in One case, it was a hit and run, and it took a year and a half to find the perpetrator. And when I was at the sentencing hearing, where this woman who had killed this 25-year-old young man, beautiful young man, and left him like roadkill, and then tampered with evidence and hid from the police for a year and a half, when she was sentenced, the father of this young man who was killed by her made it pretty clear in his testimony in front of the judge that nothing the judge would decide that day, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, would really address the pain of this loss. And Bridget, I would say that if there's a way to help her understand that comfort is never going to come from the legal justice system, that comfort has to come from her family, her friends, and leading a different kind of life as a result of the pain she suffered, a gentler life. That is the best we can hope for. Even if this person was executed, I doubt it would bring her much of a sense of relief. Maybe I'm wrong about that, because there are people who do feel otherwise, but I have never been in a situation where, when deeply hurt by another, the criminal justice system has really brought emotional satisfaction. Maybe monetary satisfaction, but I haven't seen it bring much emotional satisfaction. That's going to have to come from elsewhere. That's great, Wendy. Wendy says, God is great. I prayed for help 5 minutes before I got onto Facebook. I never listened to live things like this. God answered fast. Thank you so much. Well, I'm glad it's helped you, and I'm glad you're with us. Lisa is saying that emotional pain is sometimes more complex, that physical pain is a wake-up call to get healthier. I think emotional pain is a wake-up call to get healthier too. I had never suffered depression before, Lisa, but after all those opioids and all that pain, I suffered terrible, terrible depression. And it too was a wake-up call to change my life, to get help. You know, if I had suffered only physical pain, and I would have gone only to a physical therapist, I would have gotten better, and I would never have examined my life. It was the emotional pain, it was the depression, it was the bitterness, it was the helplessness, that forced me to get psychological help. So I actually think emotional pain can be, should be, hopefully will be a greater motivator to reach out and change our lives than even physical pain. That's my hope, and that's really a lot of the reason that I wrote this book. And I hope that helps many of you who are listening today. Cecily is asking, do you deal with addiction, specifically sex addiction, and the pain that it is brought on in a second to the betrayed partner when this discovery happens? Any words of wisdom on how best to deal with this heart-wrenching pain? I have dealt with this many, many times with members of my congregation. We live in a time and a place where sex addiction feels different and is perceived differently than a gambling addiction or a drug addiction or an addiction to alcohol. But all of these addictions are clearly rooted in some kind of core wound, Cecily. There is some core wound in that person you love, and sex is the anesthesia, the escape. The addiction to sex is the self-medication, and as difficult as it is to see it that way, I hope that you can, so that you and your partner can begin to talk about and look at the core wound. Jonathan Safran Foer, a great writer, in his novel that came out a couple of years ago called Here I Am, says in that novel, every person is wounded, and remembering another person's wounds makes it easier to forgive. So if you can realize that the sex addiction was not so much about the sex as it was about the anesthetic feeling, the escape, the numbness that that provided as an antidote to this core wound, whatever it is. I hope that will enable you to, with your partner, talk about this core wound and work on healing that terrible pain. At which point, then hopefully, the addiction to sex will no longer be kind of necessary anesthesia. I promise you it can be done. I've worked with people who have successfully beaten this addiction. And it's a tough addiction because we live in a society that bombards us with sexuality all day, all night, including the internet, movies, TV shows, magazines, billboards. It's all around us. And I hope what I've said to you will help point you in the right direction in in this pain bringing you closer together, not further apart, with someone you clearly deeply love. Sarah's asking, when you are so deeply depressed, what is the first step out? I just want to hide in bed. Well, this is a step. That question is a step, Sarah. I think reaching out to a psychiatrist is an important, really important first step. And you know, one of the topics I'm thinking about writing a sermon on for the upcoming High Holy Days in the fall, which are the most important and holiest days for Jews, I'm thinking about writing a sermon called "A Little is a Lot." And the older I get, the more I believe this, that these seemingly small changes are actually quite enormous in our lives. So, Terry, if you can find one person to reach out to, if you can get help from a talented psychiatrist, as I did, I think that is the important first step. One thing I assure you, you are not going to get out of this alone. No one suffers pain better alone. The prisoner cannot free himself. I cannot stress this enough. Oh, Wendy's saying, I just bought your book on Audible. Thank you so much, Wendy. I narrated it myself because I couldn't imagine someone else reading my words like that. So I hope you find it really meaningful. Linda, I've been praying with my gratefulness all day as I still have my son and looking for guidance. And then, Rabbi, you offer help to all of us here. Thank you. Thank you, Linda. That's a beautiful thought. And that's prayer in its deepest and most meaningful sense. So thank you so much for that. We're about finished. We've just got a couple of minutes left. So let me just say to all of us, all of you, that I'm here to help. You can email me anytime through steveleader.com or through Hay House, or you can Google Wilshire Boulevard Temple and get to me that way. I hope that you'll really, really take this book seriously and for yourself, and I hope you'll share it with others. I'm not particularly good at social media, so I would appreciate help. I'd appreciate reviews on Amazon, anything you can do to help encourage people to have these important conversations about pain, both physical and emotional, and the suffering we all endure. Anything we can do to help each other be worthy of our suffering. It is a great and beautiful and powerful gift. So please go to Amazon, get the book, get the Kindle, get the audio version, write a review, tweet, Snapchat, Facebook, do whatever it is you do, Instagram, and let's keep this very important conversation going. I want to thank everyone for being here and being a part of this conversation. And I especially want to thank Hay House for being so generous and giving me, an hour of this precious community that I'm so proud to be a part of. Linda is also saying, any caring person here, please feel free to offer me kind advice for my adult son on how to cope with my utter sadness. I really hope we will do exactly that. Let's reach out and help each other. Linda is reaching out. And let's reach back, and not with let me know if you need anything. Let's reach back with our own life experience and our own hearts to her and to each other. The more we take care of each other, the more we will heal and grow, from the pain that we all inevitably suffer. I'm going to just look down and see if we have any final thoughts. Lots of thank yous, which I so much appreciate. Some of you sent me a PM, which is great, and I'll get to you. Sharon is saying hugs are always good. Yes, so true. With my father's Alzheimer's, I've really learned about the importance of touch, just holding his hand. So let's all help each other, take care of each other. Thank you all for being a part of this today. And I look forward to hearing from as many of you who are willing to reach out. Be well, everyone.